YouTube here. Good Novent, good evening. Good Novent, you don't know Yiddish, a little Yiddish? Or I could say it in Polish, Dobranoc. See?
Oh, that's good night.
Oh, that's not in Polish, that's in Spanish.
No.
Whatever noche you just said. Okay, we're going to share this. We're going to share it on two more platforms. We'll let everyone join me while. It's great to see. From Arizona, from Idaho, from Bozeman, coming together to learn Torah, to learn about Kairach. Baruch made it this week. We are very elated. We are grateful to Hashem for giving us memory. Okay. Yes, if all of you are asking, because I get this question all the time, the background is real. That is really the sky and really the trees, and it's 7 p.m. in Bozeman, Montana. It's going to get dark in about 6 hours from now. And it's if you want to enjoy that kind of background, you got to come to Montana. And all of you in New York, where it's 106 degrees, come to the land of the free and the home of the brave, where it's 75 degrees and beautiful. Kalispell? Oh, the cows are out. Yeah, we just saw the cows right outside the shul. The cows are grazing in the field right near the shul. Every shul needs a few cows grazing.
Okay, you sent it to me.
Okay, one more share, and whoever needs to mute themselves should mute themselves. Baruch Haba, there we go. Okay, one more share, and we're good to go. There we go. Okay, good evening, Jane. Good to see you. Good evening, Yaakov. What a beautiful oilum. Okay, we are done sharing. Something that rabbis don't say often, but I am done sharing for today. Let me let Elliot into class. We are in the book of Numbers, the Parsha of Kairach, and we're going to jump to chapter 16, verse 22. And you will find that on page 917. So, we are deep into the book of Bamidbar, to the book of Numbers. Already last week in the Parsha, we discussed the spies. So we're dealing with rebellion number God knows what, with the Jewish people in the desert. This one takes a unique twist. Give me a bottle of water in case I need it. Thank you, Robert. This one takes a unique twist because it came from, I guess last week also, it came from the spies, and the spies, when they were sent out, were, it says, Ksherim Hayu, they were kosher, they were good people, that's why they were chosen by Moshe. But here it even takes it a step further, where the people that are rebelling against God and Moses and Aaron and the system are really the holiest of the holy, some of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people. It speaks about them as Rosh Sanhedrin, is the head of the rabbinical courts. You had Korach himself, who was a member of the Levite family. You had, like I mentioned in Shul 2 weeks ago, Nachshon and Aminadab. You had really good people that joined the rebellion. And there's a variety there's the practical side of it, where simply jealousy and wealth gets in the way. I mean, Korach was extremely wealthy, and he was just simply jealous. And jealousy can do that to people. But the Rebbe always takes it to doesn't take away, doesn't negate the practical, but there's good reason to take it to a deeper layer of understanding, to understand why and how Moshe dealt with it. So those of you that watched my video clip from yesterday on the Parsha, it talked a little from one angle. That's not where I'm going to go today. I want to read a few verses inside, and then we're going to assess it based on some incredible, and I say incredible because every time I learn something new, I'm always blown away. So I learned it today for the first time, and I'm sharing with you hot off the press, even though the majority of it is from a Farbrengen in 1971, and then a little bit from a Farbrengen in 1973, but a majority of it was from the summer of 71, a little touch from the summer of 73 from the Rebbe's teachings on this Parsha. And as I was learning it, I was like, it's incredible. How is it that I'm 43 years old and I never read this? It's an incredible assessment, an incredible analysis of Rashi. So if you look on page 917, it says, God spoke to Moshe, and I should say, we're in this Chumash, we're in the live Chumash that we use here at the Shul. 917, no? Yeah. I'm starting from the top. I'll get to 22. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, disassociate yourself from the congregation, and I will destroy them in an instant. Meaning God is now talking about retaliation against Korach and his ilk and his gang of rebels. They fell on their faces and said, O merciful God, God who knows everybody's thoughts, just because one man sins, should you be angry with the whole congregation? So now Moshe and Aaron are defending, specifically Moshe is defending Korach's gang and says, why are you going to punish everyone? Just punish Korach. He's the leader. He's the ringleader. He's the master. He's the Khomeini. He's the head of the snake. God spoke to Moshe saying, you are right. I will punish only the sinners. Speak to the congregation saying, get away from Korach and Dasan and Aviram's homes. In other words, Moshe said, I want you to only punish the ringleader because he's the real sinner. What does God respond? God says, yes, I'm only going to punish the sinners. But it happens to be the sinners are a lot more than just Korach. So we really need to understand what was going on here in the conversation. And it gets more interesting when you study Rashi. Rashi says as follows. When he says the words, God who knows everyone's thoughts. So Rashi says, Yoidea machashovas, God, you know people's thoughts. And then Moshe told God, Ein midascha kimidas basar v'dam. Your attributes, God, your way of operating is not like a person of flesh and blood. Melech basar v'dam, a king of flesh and blood, shesar all of Mitzas Medina, who some of his country, some of his nation soured on him. If you were a physical king of flesh and blood, and some members of your country, of your nation, soured on you, the king doesn't know, because he's a person of flesh and blood. He doesn't know who's the sinner. He knows there's a rebellion, but he can't track down who's running it, who's in charge of it. Therefore, when you're dealing with a physical king of flesh and blood, when he's angry, nifra, he pays back everybody. He punishes everybody because he can't decipher who's really behind the coup, who's really behind the souring. That's what Moshe told God. Aval ata, but you, God, master of the universe, lefanecha gluyos kol hamachshavos, you know everybody's thoughts. You know everything. V'yodeya ata mi'achayte, you know who's the sinner. Ha'ish echad hu achayte. So if one person is the sinner, meaning Korach is the sinner, and you know that, you're going to become angry at the whole congregation? In other words, Moshe was trying to explain to God, trying to emphasize to God, almost as a lawyer for the Jewish people, that God shouldn't let out his nerves and his anger and his upsetness about the rebellion against everyone. Just take out Korach. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Yafa Amarta, you're right. You're 100% right. I am not like a king of flesh and blood. I'm only going to take out the sinners. I know, umaydia, and I will let you know, mi chato, mi lechato, who sinned and who didn't sin. And it's going to be a lot more people than you think. In other words, God used Moshe's defense as the explanation for why he's going to do exactly what Moshe said. You're right. I do know everyone's thoughts, which is why you're going to see that it's more than one sinner, and I'm going to deal with it accordingly. This is straight up Rashi. This is Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki in the 11th century, is giving us basic understanding of the conversation between Moses and God in this pre-punishment stage or pre-punishment phase of the Korach rebellion. When you study this Rashi without the Rebbe's analysis, it seems like what Rashi is saying, that with the king of flesh and blood, they end up punishing people who didn't sour. They get lumped in and they get punished for the general collective sin, even if they didn't sin. But God, on the other hand, knows who sinned and who didn't sin, and therefore he shouldn't do that. And Moshe was saying, God, you're better than that. Don't do that. That's what it seems like when you study Rashi without the Rebbe's analysis. In other words, Moshe is saying, God, you should do better than a king of flesh and blood. Kings of flesh and blood don't really know how to decipher, so they punish even people who didn't sin, which, by the way, is true. During a coup, during a rebellion, kings of flesh and blood do punish a lot of people who are not deserving of it. If you don't believe me, ask the people in Persia right now, in Iran. They're hanging people today. As we speak, they're hanging people in Iran because they think that they were part of the coup against the government in the last 12 days. But don't worry, the Americans in New York, Mr. Banzami, whatever his name is, the anti-Semite who won the election yesterday, he's going to tell us how we're just trying to ruin the people of Iran. It's all wonderful. People of Iran are suffering in the hands of kings of flesh and blood who don't know how to decipher, and they lump people, literally this week's Rashi. They just lump them all together. But really, is that really what Rashi's trying to say? It seems a little off, and this is why, the Rebbe says. First of all, in order to make a case to God, not to punish innocent people, we don't have to make a whole calculation of comparing God to a king of flesh and blood. Why did Moshe have to go through this whole thing? By the way, a king of flesh and blood would punish people that are not deserving of punishment. But you, God, couldn't he just say to God, hello, we don't want to punish innocent people? You don't have to make the whole comparison. Just say, Moshe could have said to God, listen, God, I know that you will never punish innocent people, so please don't just punish Korach. Why did he have to give the whole explanation of comparing God to a king of flesh and blood to make his point, his valid point, that God should never want to punish an innocent person? Sort of like Abraham did in Parshas Vayera, in the book of Genesis, where he said to God, you're going to punish righteous people together with wicked people? No, that's what Moshe was saying. Why does he have to make the comparison to a king of flesh and blood? It seems superfluous. It seems unnecessary. Second of all, let's talk about a king of flesh and blood for a moment, says the Rebbe. If it's a righteous or an upstanding king of flesh and blood, you sort of, if you have to think of that, maybe like the king of Denmark during World War II, who saved many Jews, right? There are kings that live life righteously. I know we were busy in America overthrowing the king, King George, but not every king was out to destroy their people. So it could be you would find a king of flesh and blood, and if he's a mensch, if he's a moral king, he also doesn't want to punish people that are innocent for no reason. So the comparison that Moshe makes to a king of flesh and blood is only a comparison to kings of flesh and blood who are wicked and immoral. But there could be kings of flesh and blood that even from a very basic level of humanity and menschlichkeit wouldn't either punish an innocent person. So we really need to understand why Rashi felt the necessity to quote this medrash about Moshe and God with the whole comparison that Moshe was sharing between a king of flesh and blood. So the question is not really on Rashi, the question is on Moshe. Why did he need to make the whole comparison to God? What did that help his case? And what was he trying to point out or prove to God with this whole comparison to a king of flesh and blood? And this is what I mean when I say you could study a Rashi for 40 years and it seems nice, but sometimes we don't even pause to say, why was that necessary? And how does it really make sense? And there must be a backstory to it. And once we get to the backstory, then we realize, oh, wow, this is what Rashi was trying to say. It's fascinating.
General or good kings, righteous kings versus non-righteous?
No, he was talking about king versus God.
Any king.
Right. Well, that's the question. Why would he use kings as an example if there could be righteous kings and they wouldn't fit that example? So the Rebbe's analysis goes as follows, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did, including the punchline at the end, the lesson that brings it all home, because that's where I always find I find joy in the intellectual analysis too. But for me, the most joyous part is taking that whole intellectual analysis and then bringing it home and how we're meant to live our lives. So the Rebbe says like this. If you look at the words that Rashi quotes from the Medrash, it says a king of flesh and blood in which part of his nation soured on him and he doesn't know who the sinner is, right? So those two languages, souring and sinner, are not equal. The sinner is the person that sinned directly against the king and rebelled. The people that soured are some people of the community who didn't behave perfectly with the king's style or his mode, but they weren't direct rebels. Every country has these people. they're not direct troublemakers. They're indirect troublemakers. They don't ever go rebel. You know, you could say they're chickens. They don't really go. They're not real rebels, but they're in the gossip world about the king, and they talk about it, and they don't like everything about him. Then they'll give you a caveat saying, I'm not really against him, but, so there's the sinner, the direct rebels, and then there's those who sour, meaning they're not the most staunch patriots who stand with their country and their king. They're just a little sheep-like, we'll go a little here, a little there, like Parav. I'm not this, and I'm not that, I'm not here, I'm not there, I'm a nobody.
Yeah.
So you're talking, what does that mean? If there's some people souring and there's one sinner in this words of Moshe, that means that there was one sinner who was trying to awaken a rebellion and got some people to sort of question the king's authority and the king's status. And since the king doesn't know, right? He doesn't know how many people are involved in this coup, how many people are bought into it, how many people did the sinner convince, the rebel convince to get on board. He ends up punishing a lot of people, not people who are totally pure and innocent, because that wouldn't make sense for a moral king. But even a moral king sometimes, in order to clean up shop, needs to punish some people that have been hanging around too much and involved in the gossiping with the direct rebels, with the direct sinners. As an example, besides Tucker Carlson?
They're doing it as an when in doubt, vote no.
Correct. In other words, you have the regular citizens, who are not involved in anything to do negative. They're good citizens, they're patriots of their country, they stand with their king, they bow. You ever see the way they clap in North Korea? Everyone claps for the king of North Korea. It's like robots. You have that. Those people, it's not a question. They stand with their king. But then you have people who are playing the wishy-washy game. And the king has no choice because he doesn't know who the sinner is, who's the direct instigator and rebel, and who just joined for the action and is sort of not 100%. But you got to get rid of them all. The king is not getting rid of innocent people, but he is getting rid of some of the riffraff, some of the troublemakers that are in the vicinity and hanging with the direct rebels, the direct instigators. Same thing here. If you take the story of Korach, it says, "Vayikoel aleim Korach es kol eda." Korach gathered the entire congregation, and Rashi says he literally went to the other tribes and tried to convince them until they joined him in the rebellion. He was charismatic, he was wealthy, he was spiritual, he had all the attributes necessary to convince people. So who was the primary rebel in the story of Korach? Let's never sugarcoat that. Let's never move away from it. The primary rebel and sinner was Korach himself. And he got the entire congregation, meaning whoever he got on board with him, including many righteous people, it was his doing. And by the way, Rashi says clearly in the beginning of this parsha, regarding the heads of the rebellion, it says Dasan and Aviram, and of the 250 leaders that were there, that joined the rebellion. Why did Dasan and Aviram join? Because they were part of the tribe of Reuven, and they were situated close by in vicinity next to Korach. And when you have the wrong neighbors, based on the Talmud and the tractate of Sukkah, Oyla Rasha, Oyla Shchene, woe is to a wicked person and woe is to their neighbors. Having bad neighbors has a very bad influence, and having super righteous neighbors has a great influence. And the Gemara learns this from Korach. So clearly, so you think Dasan and Aviram, who were troublemakers for the last 30 years, they were troublemakers already in Egypt, but here when it comes to the Korach rebellion, it says clearly that their sinfulness or their rebellion or their gossipy, joining the rebellion was a direct result of Korach's instigation and brainwashing and bringing them on board. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes to God and says, my dear God, it's true that with a king of flesh and blood, even a moral king of flesh and blood, a king of flesh and blood has no choice sometimes but to punish not just the prime sinner and instigator, but those who join the operation as well. Why? Because it's hard to know as a king of your flesh and blood. You're not God. You don't know everyone's thoughts. You don't know who's the primary, who's secondary, who's third, who's running it. So you have no choice sometimes but to lump them together and take out the problem. Right? What did Trump say? We're back. I'm sorry, not Trump. George Bush said in 2001, when he was talking about smoking the terrorists out of their pits, we're going to smoke them out of their pits. He said any country that is terrorist or harbors terrorism, right? So when you're a king of flesh and blood, sometimes you have no choice. You got to get rid of the primary sinners and rebels, but also the secondary and third class sinners and rebels. But Moshe says to God, God, you know everyone's thoughts. And you know, God, that the primary sinner here was who? Korach. Don't give anyone else credit. He ran the operation. He instigated the masses. He was the articulate, charismatic, wealthy, religious leader who ran this op. So punish him all you want. Take him out in all his glory. Let everyone learn when you take out Korach. But don't take the people that joined him. And God says, you're 100% right. You're right. I am not a king of flesh and blood, and I would never take someone that was not a primary sinner and a primary rebel out if it wasn't their direct fault. I wouldn't even take the people who joined the rebellion, but they didn't really realize what they were getting involved in. They sort of did it innocently. I wouldn't even take them out. But your mistake, Mr. Moshe, God says, is that you thought your assessment that Korach was the only primary rebel, that's where your mistake was. I know God says that Dasan and Abiram were sinners on their own, and not just because of Korach. You think, right? So you think that it wasn't their, but Korach went because they're neighbors with Korach. It's true they were neighbors, but don't underestimate for a moment that the leaders that ran the whole operation, where they brought a special offering to see if it's going to be accepted by God, these people deliberately joined the rebellion. They are considered, in my eyes, God says, as sinners. Maybe they didn't start the operation like Korach, but they are not just innocent bystanders who happen to be in the vicinity. They are direct rebels, and they need to pay a price for it because we need to clean up house. We need to clean up the Jewish world from this group of rebels. So Moshe did his job. Moshe tried to articulate to God through the analogy of a king of flesh and blood, to point out to God why maybe a king of flesh and blood indeed does not have a choice but to take along the sidekicks who joined the rebel. But God shouldn't. God said, you're right. I would never take along just the sidekicks. These are not sidekicks. These are direct rebels who made a choice to join Korach and go after Moses, go after Aaron, go after Elitzaphan, who was the leader of the tribe of Levi, which was Korach's primary upsetness. He was upset that he wasn't chosen to be the leader of the tribe, but the other cousin was chosen to be the leader of the tribe. That was a direct rebellion. And so with the greatest of intentions that they may have had, they thought, oh, we're fighting for equality. Just like in communism, right? In communism, they fight for equality, and the only ones that end up with anything are the people fighting for equality, the leaders. The people that they're so-called fighting for end up broke, impoverished, with nothing to their name, being controlled by a bunch of people screaming about equality. New York is going to find out what that's like in a few months. The joke's on us, but they'll find out. I got a call yesterday from a Jewish leader in New York. He says, you ready for the influx of Jews to Montana from New York? I'm like, do me a favor. Don't tell the people in Montana that I have anything to do with it. You know what I mean? Don't blame it on me. But that's the truth. You scream equality. Oh, what about the poor people? What about the working people? Korach said, I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting. The first words that Korach said, the entire congregation is holy. Why do you guys make yourself superior? We have to have equality of holiness. Except 5 seconds later, he said he wants to be the high priest. He went from equality to wanting to be a high priest. What happened to equality? Because that's always in the name of called communism, socialism. They all have the same idea. And by the way, it didn't start in Europe. It didn't start in Russia and the Soviet Union. It started way before. It didn't start with Mao Zedong. It started all the way back. Korach, the dictator playbook. I'm here for the regular people, for the small people. I'm here to fight for the citizens who can't fight for themselves. I want equality. And 5 seconds later, I want to be the high priest. He didn't say, I want to be a priest. He didn't say, I want to be a leader. I want to be the high priest. And so Moshe understood that Korach was the primary. What he didn't necessarily understand is that The others, maybe they weren't the primary, maybe they weren't the initiators, but they were very much involved directly in the sinfulness of the rebellion.
Maybe 2 degrees of the ones that.
Yeah, and there was different punishments, by the way. Some of them died by being swallowed in the ground. Some of them died by being put a fire, internal fire. Some of them got both because they deserved both, including Korach. He got both punishments. That's not my point. My point is, Moshe really believed that you should only punish Korach, and God needed to educate him that he's right. Only sinners get punished, but he has a misunderstanding of who the sinners are, and it's a much broader group than just Korach. And here's where I
Need to know.
well, only God could know. Our job is always to give them benefit of the doubt.
Only tells us.
Well, that was part of the rebellion, sure, but that may not be necessarily punishable by death. That was they used that as a way to argue with Moshe and to prove him wrong. But when they went down with the offering into the tabernacle, that's when everything hit the fan. But here's where the Rebbe really brings it home for me, and that's where I was just smiling in the library earlier today. Like, this is such a beautiful. The Rebbe says if you look in the last, forget about it, if you look at the last 20 Torah portions, all the way back to Exodus, every time you hear Dasan and Aviram's name, it's associated with something nasty that they were doing either to Moshe or to God. Right? They told Moshe with a lot of chutzpah, it's not enough that you took us from the land flowing of milk and honey. They were talking about Egypt as the land of milk and honey, to kill us in the desert, to be controlling over us. You want to poke our eyes out? Even if you poke our eyes out, we're not going to go up to Israel. And they made Moshe really upset. It actually says in the verse, Vayichar leMoshe ma'od. It made Moshe very, very, I don't want to say angry, but severely disappointed. Hold on. And even though these guys have been making Moshe's life miserable, all the way back, remember, he had to escape. He lived for 60 years in the land of Midian. You know that, right? You remember that? I'll say it over just in case you don't remember. Moshe, when he was 20 years old, he left the palace. He was living in Pharaoh's palace because Batya, Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, adopted him. At 20 years old, he's now a big boy. He leaves the palace. He sees a Jewish person being beaten to death by an Egyptian. So Moshe intervenes, kills the Egyptian, and buries him. The next day, he sees 2 Jews fighting. And he says that he sees one of them lifting his hand to hurt the other. And he says, Lama Sakariecha, why you, Russia, you wicked person, why are you lifting your hand against another person? That's by the way, where we learned that you're not allowed to even lift your hand against another person. Forget about hitting them. You're not allowed to even go, you don't lift your hand. They said to him, you're talking? Are you the one that killed the Egyptian? So he had to run away, and for 60 years he spent in Midian. He came back when he was 80 years old, when God spoke to him at the burning bush, and he became the leader to take them out of Egypt. Who were the 2 guys fighting? Dasan and Avira. So now, 30 plus years later, it's a good question. I don't remember. I don't want to answer that. I'll look it up. Do you remember? They're always mentioned together. It's a good question. But the point is, these same 2 guys who made Moshe's life miserable, right? When it comes to the God punishing the rebels, what's Moshe doing to God? He's trying to make sure that only Korach should be punished, not who? Dasan and Aviram and the other guys. He's defending Dasan and Aviram. Any other person would say, oh, thank God, he's going to get rid of Dasan and Aviram. I've been waiting for this for 30 years. Get rid of my enemy. Hit him with a car. Throw him off a roof. Whatever Putin does. Throw him off a plane. Get rid of him. Simcha, it's exciting. The night before the showdown, Moshe is going door to door, tent to tent, trying to get everyone else to repent, to do tshuva, including Dasan and Aviram. And when Moshe comes to defend the Jewish people in the time of the rebellion, he's defending Dasan and Aviram and saying to God, I don't think they were instigators. They were not the direct sinners. I don't think you should kill them. Just Korach. And of course, God obviously argued with him, and Dasan and Aviram did eventually die at this episode after a long, long time. But what the Rebbe says in that 1973 Farbrengen is how much we have to ingrain within ourselves the attribute of giving people the benefit of the doubt, and not just giving them the benefit of the doubt, but finding merit in people. When you meet someone Not just to say, oh, well, I assume they're a good guy. That's a nice thing to do. But when you see someone, to give them and say, oh, I think there's big merit here. I do it a lot lately with driving. There's a lot of crazy drivers that have moved to Bozeman, and the rule was that only I'm allowed to be the crazy driver in Bozeman. The problem is a lot of others have joined, and it's problematic. So what have I blame it on California? There's plenty of people from other places like New York that are bad drivers too. But you see someone driving, right? So we used to say, what if they're taking their wife right now? What if they're on the way to the ER to have a baby? Maybe that's why they're driving like lunatics. Maybe they got a terrible stomachache. They're flying home to go to the bathroom. People can relate to that. Maybe they just had a rough day at work. Maybe they just got fired and they're just. I mean, I saw a group today that looked like they came to America last week and they're probably going to leave next week. And they were driving like pretty crazy people. Maybe where they come from, that's how they drive. And over here, I don't know. That's not the way we normally drive. But unfortunately for me, I was behind them. My point is giving people not just the benefit of the doubt, but seeing the merit. If Moshe Rabbeinu could defend Dasan and Aviram, even though externally, from what we can see, all they deserved was to get blown out, swallowed in the ground, and put on fire. And yet he's standing to God and saying, God, don't do it. Maybe they weren't really the instigators. They weren't really the rebels. They were just following Lon Korach. He's the primary sinner. Don't do it to them. You imagine what kind of stones, what kind of guts, what kind of inner core you have to be Moshe Rabbeinu, a shepherd of humanity, to be able to see the merit in Dasan Aviram after the years of what they did to him. The people who were busy chastising are not people that did anything close to what Dasan and Aviram did to God. The people that we judge on a general day in society and don't give them the benefit of the doubt and don't see the merit are not people that have ever done anything close to us when you compare it to what Dasan and Aviram did to Moshe. And yet Moshe was able to defend them, and we're ready to throw people under the bus in 5 seconds. A guy walks onto the plane and spills his coffee on your shirt. It's like a living Holocaust. It's a Holocaust. That's it. Your life is over. And I can relate. Because we're fat Americans who live comfortably and we don't want anyone to get involved in our comfortability. And if someone even remotely gets in the way of our comfort life, that's it. They're traced, they're done, they're gone, they're out. Take a chill pill. You don't know the whole story. And your job isn't even to know the whole story. Are you a replica? Are you emulating Moshe Rabbeinu to see the good and see the merit in people? And therefore defend the people, find the goodness in people? It's so much more fun and rewarding. Someone says, oh, Rabbi, I'm so sorry, I missed the appointment. And you want to shoot them. What do you mean you missed the appointment? I just drove 9 miles to meet with you. What do you mean you missed the appointment? I totally forgot. And if they don't tell you, you know, how are you supposed to know? So you have to assume the worst. But then an hour later, they say, I didn't have a chance to tell you, Rabbi, but my grandmother just passed away and I had to go arrange quickly a trip to the funeral. Oh, now you feel a little bad that you got all angry. Life happens. It happens to you and it happens to the people around you. Just yesterday, or was it Monday? Monday, a person I know very, very well, I would actually consider them a dear friend, messaged me on WhatsApp and said, Rabbi, my 28-year-old daughter was killed in a car crash on impact, hit by a semi. And she left her husband with 3 young, beautiful children, ages 9, 7, and 3. And I had to get on the phone and talk to the parents. I was crying on the phone. I couldn't contain myself. What do you think a rabbi has some trick of how you could tell someone how to deal with a 28-year-old child who was fine 1 minute ago and then unfortunately didn't stop at a stop sign because didn't realize there was a stop sign and got hit by a semi and died on impact? Now imagine that person would have said to me, so I've asked this person something, they wouldn't answer, right? Then I'd get upset. Why didn't they answer me? Because I don't really know the whole story, what's going on in their life. And Chavi has trained me with this idea, what don't I know? But it's more than that. It's not just what don't I know, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's what am I willing to do to see the best option out there? And it's not a natural place for me personally. I'm an organized person. If someone gives me their word, I expect them to follow through. But Chavi has trained me. I've gotten a lot better with it. And I'm still working on it. To pause and say, hold on. People just don't ignore things they say out of fun. There must be a real good reason. Like last week, when you didn't show up at class, I was actually genuinely curious. What the heck happened? Is he okay? When you come to a class for 18 years and then you don't show up, we get concerned. But I was able to ask the question. I wasn't judgmental. I was just genuinely curious. Are you okay? And your answer was pretty straightforward. You got the mention, you didn't come, and we're good. And I have a lot of pity for that. I have a lot of understanding. So that is the Nakuda. If Moshe Rabbeinu, if Moses, who put up with decades of torment from Dasan and Aviram, and yet when push came to shove, he was literally demanding of God to see the good in them and only punish Korach, how much more so should we internalize that idea? And it goes back to something I've shared, and I'll share it again, and I'll wrap up with that. I once asked someone who was a big Obama fan, I'm sorry, I once asked someone who was a big Obama fan if they could tell me anything good about Donald Trump. He said no, before I could even finish the question. Like nothing? Like even his position on Israel, for example? Then I asked someone once that was a big Trump fan, this was like in 2016, I was like, could you tell me something nice about Barack Obama? Nothing! Like nothing? How about stem cell research? It helps so many people. I said, I know George Bush stopped it for his religious reasons, and Obama reintroduced stem cell research, which helps millions of people and will help even more millions in the future. Can you give him credit for that? Because if you can't, you're not an honest arbiter of anything. You're just a political hack. You're just a cult member. There's good in everyone. Doesn't mean you have to side with them on things that aren't good. But when there is good, to emphasize that and amplify that and see the good, while simultaneously saying, I disagree with X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to amplify the good. You have Israelis that say today, Rak lo Bibi. No matter what, just not Bibi. It's like in America, it's a derangement thing. What do you mean no Bibi? Okay, you don't like Bibi. Therefore, everything Bibi does is wrong? Like taking out nukes, is that a problem too? But there's lack of curiosity, there's lack of honesty, and there's certainly a lack of giving benefit of the doubt and seeing the merit. And if Moshe could do it for Dasan and Aviram, you can do it for your neighbor who has the wrong flag that you don't like in his front yard. You could do it for the person in the grocery who gets under your skin because they're wearing something or doing something that represents something that you can't stand. We can find ways to be better, to be more shepherding of humanity's flock, to be a shepherd of society, and to be an arbiter of goodness. Because your nastiness and your judgmentalism and your cynicism doesn't do anybody good, starting from yourself. You walk around like a misery. A whole day people are walking around mad about something. I mean, people all day, they're mad. You have Republicans, Trumpers, all day they're mad at every Democrat. You have Democrats a whole day, they sleep with Trump, they talk about Trump, they eat with Trump, he's in their head 24/7. Get a life, all of you. Mm-hmm. Literally, get a life. Go learn some Torah, go do some mitzvahs, go do some kindness, and start giving people the benefit of the doubt, seeing the merit. And whatever you think you suffered in the hands of whoever, remember Moshe suffered a lot more from his flock, the Jewish people, especially from Dasan and Aviram, and he was able to find worthiness in them to defend them, not just to stand, but to actually go to God and defend them. Even if he was unsuccessful, he tried. And that is something we should emulate and internalize, because that will make our world brighter. That will make our world with more good. And that ultimately will bring Mashiach Tzidkenu in a time when there will be no animosity, no more jealousy, no more nastiness, and no more politics. That's the best news about Mashiach. There'll be no more politics. Not only no more war, no more politics, which is the biggest war, but the coming of Mashiach may be speedily in our days. Amen. Have a rockin' rest of the week. We'll see you back here next Wednesday is July 2nd. So in honor of July 4th, we're going to have class on Wednesday night as regular time. Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. We'll see you there. Or else, if you want your name mentioned at the Ohel, I sent out an email. I sent out a Facebook message. If you want your name mentioned for prayer, if you sent me an email, I have it. And if you want your name mentioned, just shoot me an email or send me a WhatsApp or send me a Facebook message, and I will mention your name, God willing, Sunday evening when I get to New York on the Rebbe's Yahrzeit. Sei gesund. Be inspired, be uplifted, and come to Shul on Shabbos, and we'll see you here soon. Sei gesund.